Somewhere in the memory of almost everyone who grew up in America, there is a summer that never actually happened. A long golden stretch of bike rides and ball games that blurs together into one perfect afternoon. The Sandlot sells that summer better than almost any film ever made, and it sells it so completely that most people never stop to wonder what it took to build. Underneath the lazy surface, there was a baking Utah set, a monster assembled by horror effects artists, a pack of boys getting into genuine trouble, and a man who would one day sue because he saw himself on the screen. The easy charm was hard won, and it began with a director who had just been fired. Number 1. Fired, then he made a classic. On screen, nothing about The Sandlot looks like the work of a man in trouble. Every frame breathes ease, the unhurried confidence of a storyteller who knew exactly which summer he wanted to bottle and took his sweet time getting there. The truth behind the camera was a great deal less settled. Not long before, David Mickey Evans had been removed from his previous picture, Radio Flyer, a film he had written and was set to direct, and the dismissal came barely 10 days into shooting. For a young filmmaker, losing a movie that fast is the kind of blow a career does not always survive. The town notices. The phone goes quiet. What Evans needed was a way back, and he understood that it had to be something simple, something personal, an idea so completely his own that no studio could ever wrestle it away from him or second-guess it into the ground the way the last one had slipped through his fingers. The Sandlot was that idea. He reached straight back into his own childhood and built the whole thing out of remembered summers, a story he could hold on to from first page to final cut. The relaxed, sun-warmed charm everyone feels in the finished film was, for the man making it, anything but relaxed. It was the work of someone with a great deal to prove and exactly one clean chance to prove it. The movie that plays like the most carefree thing ever committed to film was, for its director, a desperate swing to save his own place in Hollywood. He connected. Number 2. It almost had a different name. For a while, the film carried a title that already belonged to someone else. David Mickey Evans first wrote his script as The Boys of Summer, a phrase that fit the material perfectly and also happened to be the exact problem. The words were already spoken for, attached to a well-known baseball book that had nothing whatsoever to do with his story, and that alone was enough to put them out of reach. So the title changed late in the process, with The Sandlot arriving more as a forced compromise than a first love, chosen in a hurry once the better title had slipped away. The shuffling did not stop at the American border either. In Britain and Australia, the film went out under a third banner entirely, The Sandlot Kids, as though no one anywhere could quite agree on what to call it. A movie that would one day settle into the permanent furniture of American memory spent its earliest days genuinely unsure of its own name. Number 3. The dog behind the whole movie. A fence stood at the edge of a 1960s neighborhood, taller than a boy, with something enormous breathing on the other side of it. Behind that fence lived an animal the local kids genuinely feared, a guard called Hercules, and on the wrong side of him sat every ball the bullies of the block had ever knocked over the top and given up for lost. David Mickey Evans grew up near that fence, and the whole of The Sandlot grew out of a single real afternoon there. The bullies had lost their only ball across, and not one of them dared go after it. Evans's younger brother did. He went over the fence, faced the thing waiting on the other side, and came back with the ball clutched in his hands. That one act of nerve bought him a place in the game the older boys had been guarding as closely as the animal guarded its yard. It is a small story, a little brother proving himself in the most frightening way available to him, but it carried the exact shape of everything the movie would later become. A kid earning his spot by doing the one thing everybody else was too scared to do. Decades on, Evans handed that fear and that courage straight to a boy named Smalls and a creature the neighborhood calls the Beast. He even kept the name. The Beast's true name, the one buried under all the wild legend the kids invent about it, is Hercules, lifted directly from the real animal that once terrified a whole street full of children. The most famous monster in the movie began as a real dog, behind a real fence that a real boy once found the courage to face. Number 4. Cast too young the first time. 9 and 10. Those were the ages of the boys first hired to play the Sandlot gang, back when Evans's script imagined its heroes a couple of years younger than the ones audiences eventually met. The trouble announced itself the moment everyone finally got into a room together. Watching the little ones run through their scenes, the production realized the gang simply looked too small for the wisecracking, half-grown attitude the story needed, and one producer reportedly took a single look and blurted out that they looked like babies out there. So the leads were recast almost from scratch. The 9 and 10-year-olds traded out for 12 and 13-year-olds with a bit more swagger in them. That one decision is most of why the gang reads the way it does. A pack of boys right on the edge of their teens, old enough to talk like they had already lived through a few summers worth remembering. Number 5. The real Wendy Peffercorn. The community pools of David Mickey Evans's Boyhood ran on a particular kind of summer heat, chlorine, hot concrete, and the older teenagers who reigned over all of it from the lifeguard chair. Out of those long afternoons came Wendy Peffercorn, lifted almost directly from life. Evans modeled her on the actual lifeguards he had watched as a kid, the young women in red one-piece suits who seemed impossibly grown up to a boy of 11 squinting up from the shallow end. One of them stayed lodged in his memory for decades. He could no longer recall her real name, only that everyone called her Bunny, and that she was the sort of older girl every boy at the pool quietly worshipped from a safe and silent distance. The famous red swimsuit in the film came straight out of that memory. So did the slack-jawed, open-mouthed staring of the boys, lifted whole from the way Evans and his friends once gazed up at that chair without ever once working up the nerve to actually say a single word to her, let alone climb the steps to that chair. It is a tender little piece of remembering, the kind of harmless first crush almost everyone carries out of some childhood summer or other, and the film treats it exactly that way, fond rather than leering. How many of the people who can quote the scene by heart ever realize that its dreamy lifeguard started life as one real girl, watched from the shallow end of a public pool, and never entirely forgotten? Number 6. A rookie's 6 audition debut. 11 years old, with not one professional credit to his name, and the entire film was about to come to rest on his shoulders. That was Tom Guiry the day he won the role of Scotty Smalls, the wide-eyed new kid at the very center of the Sandlot. He had never acted on screen in his life. An agent had happened to catch him in a local stage production of A Christmas Carol and plucked him straight out of amateur theater, and that small piece of luck was the whole of his resume. What came next was a gauntlet. Guiry sat through something like half a dozen separate rounds of auditions before the part was finally his, each one another chance to be politely thanked and sent home. For a child who had never stood in front of a camera, outlasting that many cuts took a steadiness most working adults would struggle to summon, and one by one, the other contenders fell away until only he was left standing. Then, the studio did the truly nerve-wracking thing. It placed its entire movie on the narrow shoulders of a total unknown. Every moment that makes audiences fall for Smalls, the homesickness, the fumbling, the slow thaw into belonging, came from a boy learning the job in real time, anchoring a film he had absolutely no track record to suggest he could carry. He turned out to be exactly the right gamble. By the time the cameras finally rolled, an entire production was leaning its full weight on a boy who had been a complete stranger to all of it only months before. Number 7. Landing. Mr. Myrtle was a long shot. On paper, the part was a gift almost any actor would happily take, a wise old man with a handful of crucial, scene-defining moments. In practice, the people making The Sandlot were convinced that the one actor they really wanted was hopelessly beyond their reach. The role of Mr. Myrtle had been written for no one in particular, an open slot sitting quietly empty, waiting on exactly the right voice to walk through the door. The suggestion came from an assistant director who had worked on Field of Dreams. "What about James Earl Jones?" he offered, and Evans treated the idea as a pleasant impossibility. This was a small picture with a modest budget, and Jones owned one of the most instantly recognizable voices on the planet, the kind of presence that simply does not turn up in films this size. Then Jones read it, and Jones said yes. All at once, a tiny baseball movie had a genuine screen legend anchoring its most resonant, quietly emotional scenes. For the boys on set, the meaning of it was far simpler and far more thrilling. The towering man now standing across from them was the voice of Darth Vader made flesh, and coming face to face with him left the young cast more than a little awestruck, half afraid to open their mouths in front of him. A piece of casting everyone had written off as a daydream ended up handing the film a gravity it had no real right to expect, the kind of presence that can make a small, modest movie suddenly feel important. Number 8. Those chattering teeth were real. The water that day sat at around 56 degrees, cold enough to knock the breath out of a grown adult, never mind a pack of skinny 12-year-olds in swim trunks. For most of the Utah shoot, the thermometer had been climbing well past 100, so on paper, the pool sequence should have come as blessed relief. Instead, it landed on one of the only genuinely cold days of the entire production, and the boys in that water were flat-out miserable. The part worth slowing down on is easy to miss entirely. Watch Squints in the moment he gazes up at Wendy, lovesick and frozen stiff, and look closely at his mouth. His teeth are visibly going. That is not a young actor performing a swoon for the camera. That is a freezing kid who genuinely could not stop shivering, caught on film and quietly left in the finished cut. A tiny accidental documentary buried right in the middle of a staged romantic beat. It is the sort of detail that rewards anyone who knows to go looking, and once you have spotted it, you can never quite unsee it. A flash of real cold hiding in plain sight under a scene about a boy losing his head over a lifeguard. Number 9. Ham made up his own trash talk. The most quoted insults in the entire film were never meant to come out of the mouth of the boy who delivers them. In Evans's original script, the whole barrage of trash talk during the showdown against the Little Leaguers belonged to Benny, the team's effortless leader. Something about it simply never sat right with the director. Cool, he decided, does not run its mouth. A leader as smooth and self-possessed as Benny would not stand around the diamond-slinging schoolyard insults, so Evans lifted the entire exchange off him and handed it instead to Ham Porter, the loud, round catcher built for exactly that kind of energy. Better still, much of what Ham fires off in the finished scene was improvised on the day, the young actor riffing well past anything written on the page until the insults took on a life of their own. The rewrite turned a chunk of dialogue that had felt wrong on one boy into one of the most beloved comic moments the movie has. It is a neat little illustration of how loose things still were on that set, the gang and even their on-field abilities still getting shaped in real time as filming went, sometimes in ways that ran exactly opposite to whatever the script had originally assumed, the writing quietly bending to fit the kids rather than the other way around. It is the kind of happy accident that tends to happen only when a director is paying very close attention. Number 10. He was too good at baseball. The entire gag of Scotty Smalls rests on a boy who cannot play the game to save his life. The young actor cast to be that boy had precisely the opposite problem. Tom Guiry was, in real life, a perfectly capable Little League player with a sound arm, soft hands, and the easy competence of a kid who had spent real summers on real diamonds. On the field, he was about the last boy you would ever expect to muff a routine catch, which made him a genuinely strange pick to play the worst player out there. Which left the production with an odd little assignment for one of its coaches: teach a genuinely skilled kid how to be convincingly, comically terrible. Guiry had to actively unlearn his own instincts, throwing and catching badly enough to sell Smalls as hopeless, while stopping carefully short of anything that looked obviously staged. The film's most famous bit of incompetence, that toe-curling, feeble little lob he heaves in from left field, took a real young athlete working hard to look like he had never once touched a ball before. So the clumsiness that audiences laughed at was, underneath all of it, its own peculiar kind of skill, performed by a player who could have made the throw cleanly on the very first try. As anyone who has ever attempted it well knows, the single hardest thing in the world to fake convincingly is failure. Number 11. This babe had played dead before. The Babe Ruth who turns up to coach Benny in a dream had haunted a baseball diamond once already. The role went to character actor Art LaFleur, and he arrived with an oddly fitting credential sitting on his resume. Years earlier, he had played one of the ghostly ballplayers in Field of Dreams, the very film that had, on this production, pointed Evans toward his Mr. Myrtle in the first place. LaFleur, in other words, was a seasoned movie spirit long before he ever laced up as the Bambino, thoroughly comfortable playing legends summoned back from the great beyond. There is a lighter footnote too. He would later go on to play the Tooth Fairy in the Santa Claus films, which makes his dream babe just one more larger-than-life apparition in a career that quietly collected them. Once you know to look for him, the same warm, weathered face keeps turning up wherever the movies need someone to step in from the world of the impossible. Number 12. One blunt note for the kiss. David Mickey Evans had exactly one piece of direction for the young actor playing Squints in the big pool scene. Staging a moment of first kiss bravado between a child performer and an older one is a genuinely delicate thing, the kind of setup a director has to handle carefully, quickly, and with as little fuss as humanly possible. so Evans kept it about as simple as direction gets. He gave Chauncey Lepardi a single, blunt, no-nonsense instruction whose entire purpose was to keep the moment appropriate and firmly child-friendly, and then he moved the production right along. It is a small but telling window into the deeply unglamorous reality of directing children, where so much of the work is just the quiet business of getting a tricky scene safely in the can and sending everyone back to the ordinary business of being 12 years old, with as little awkwardness as possible left hanging in the air afterward. Number 13. A real tree, a million fake leaves. The enormous oak that holds the boys' treehouse came to the production completely free, which is very nearly unheard of. The homeowner who owned it was already planning to have it cut down because a full century of slow root growth had been quietly destroying the foundation of his house, so handing the doomed tree over to a passing film crew cost him nothing he was not already about to lose. For the Sandlot, it amounted to a windfall, a genuine 100-year-old giant standing precisely where the story wanted one. Then came the catch that nobody had budgeted for. Real, living leaves were never going to hold their summer green across a long, punishing shoot, and they would have browned and dropped well before the production ever wrapped. So the crew quietly took on something close to absurd in its sheer scale. They stripped the entire tree bare, then dressed it all over again, branch by branch and limb by limb, with more than 1 million artificial leaves, each one made of wire and satin. It stands as one of those small miracles of invisible craft that the audience is never meant to notice at all, an almost entirely fake canopy passing for living shade in very nearly every frame it appears in. The most natural, sun-dappled tree in the whole movie was, leaf by patient leaf, very nearly handmade. Number 14. Yeah, almost wasn't cast. Marty York was never originally meant to be yeah at all. He had come in to read for Bertram, an entirely different member of the gang, and for a while, that was the part he seemed headed toward. What rearranged everything was a plain stroke of bad luck. The young actor first cast as Yeah fell ill right as the production was about to roll, and with the clock already running and no time at all to spare, York was quietly slid over into the role instead. The lineup that fans now know by heart, every familiar face locked into its familiar spot, came within a single sick day of looking noticeably different. It is easy to forget how much of any finished film comes down to luck exactly like this. A casting choice settled, in the end, by whichever boy simply happened to be healthy that week. How many other tiny accidents of timing, never written down anywhere, quietly shaped the exact gang that fans picture whenever they think back on the film? Number 15. The gross recipe behind the dip. A wad of something brown and chewy, a spinning carnival ride, and a row of increasingly green-faced boys. That is the formula for one of the movie's most memorably stomach-turning sequences. The fake chewing tobacco the kids tuck into their cheeks was cooked up out of licorice and bacon bits, an unappetizing combination by any measure. It turned out convincing enough that several of the boys went genuinely queasy well before the cameras had even reached the worst of what was coming. The payoff, of course, is the ride, where the entire gang loses its collective lunch in spectacular, synchronized fashion. The on-screen sickness got plenty of help from a homemade brew the crew whipped up specially for the occasion, a truly grim blend of split pea soup, baked beans, oatmeal, water, and gelatin, ladled out as needed. Between the already queasy boys and that bucket of fake nausea, a fair share of what looks like real misery spinning around on that ride very nearly was. It made for one of the grosser days of work on a movie you would otherwise expect to be wall-to-wall wholesome, a small, sticky monument to just how unpleasant comedy can be to actually film. Number 16. Best friends before they met. A solid 2 weeks ahead of the rest of the cast arriving in Utah, 2 of its boys were already there on the ground. David Mickey Evans had deliberately brought Tom Guiry and Mike Viter in early, for one very specific reason. The entire emotional spine of the film leans on the audience believing in the deep bond between Smalls and Benny. So the 2 of them spent those extra weeks rehearsing together and, just as importantly, simply hanging around each other with nothing much to do, building something real before a single other co-star had even arrived in the state. The gambit paid off better than anyone had planned. When the rest of the gang finally rolled in, they took one look at how easy Guiry and Vitar already were together and assumed the 2 had been close friends for years. A friendship the movie absolutely needed to read, as Lifelong was, in no small part, quietly manufactured 2 weeks ahead of everyone else's schedule. Number 17. The Beast Walked on Stilts. On screen, the creature guarding that junkyard reads as nothing but pure animal, a slavering, towering giant of a dog without a single trace of anything human in it. Behind the fence, in many of its largest and most fearsome shots, it was actually two grown men. The sheer size of the beast in those moments came not from any real animal at all, but from a full creature suit, worked entirely from the inside by a pair of puppeteers. To give the thing its unnatural, looming height and that heavy, top-heavy lurch of a walk, the performers operated on spring steel stilts, hoisting the whole rig far above the scale of even the largest ordinary dog. It was a genuinely clever piece of old-fashioned movie magic, the kind of hands-on, built-from-scratch creature work that arrived right at the tail end of its own era, just before the easy digital monsters showed up and made suits and stilts feel like relics overnight. A suit, a steel frame, two human beings, and a great deal of careful engineering all stood in for the single snarling animal the audience is so completely convinced it sees. The price of that illusion, though, was genuinely brutal. The Utah heat in which they were filming could climb to something like 112 degrees, and inside a sealed creature suit that turned the whole rig into something close to a furnace. The puppeteers labored in there, take after take, pushed right to the ragged edge of heat stroke, putting themselves in real physical danger in order to bring to life a creature that, in the end, turns out to be a total sweetheart. There is a deep and quiet irony folded into all of it. The monster the neighborhood children call the Beast, the one whose real name, of course, is Hercules, looked its most terrifying on screen at exactly the moments the men trapped inside it were closest to collapse. Number 18. The line that built a cult hit. The Sandlot was barely a blip when it first arrived in theaters that spring, a modest little earner that came and went without making much noise at all. Its real life, the one that genuinely mattered, only began well afterward, out in the endless rerun economy of cable television and rented videotapes, where a whole generation of kids stumbled onto it on rainy afternoons and slow weekends and watched it until they had worn the tape clean through. Over the years, it quietly crossed the line from a film people had seen into a film people knew by heart. The clearest proof of all, that is the strange way the movie still talks back to you out in ordinary life. One single exasperated phrase from it, just 4 words. One of the boys howls at Smalls in frustration, broke loose from the screen entirely, and lodged itself deep in everyday American speech, repeated constantly by people who have never once sat down and watched the whole thing. Tom Guiry has said that complete strangers still fire the line at him almost daily, decades later, to the point where he can barely make it through an airport without hearing it shouted somewhere in his direction. It adds up to a strange and rather lovely sort of immortality for a picture that first opened to little more than a shrug. 3 full decades on, the single most enduring thing about the entire film may simply be that one frustrated yell, "You're killing me, Smalls!" Number 19. A magazine kept the boys in line. One of the strangest little bargains ever struck on the set had nothing whatsoever to do with acting. As the well-worn story goes, Chauncey Lepardi, the boy who played Squints, offered to personally keep the restless, perpetually bored gang of kids on their best behavior in exchange for a single favor from the film's cinematographer, namely, a copy of a certain grown-up magazine that a pack of 12-year-olds were very firmly not supposed to get anywhere near. Cinematographer Anthony Richmond, by his own later telling, went ahead and handed one over, and the boys reportedly settled right down afterward. Lepardi himself has never fully confirmed the whole story, allowing only, with a shrug, that it probably did go more or less the way people say it did. It is exactly the kind of half-remembered set legend that slowly hardens into folklore across 30-odd years, just true enough to keep getting retold, and just fuzzy enough that nobody will ever quite manage to pin it down for certain. Number 20. Horror-grade puppet, friendly dog. The creature that eventually becomes the movie's single most lovable softie started out looking like something dragged straight out of a nightmare. The animatronic head and full creature suit at the heart of the beast were the handiwork of effects artist Rick Lazzarini, a craftsman whose career runs right down the seam between gentle family entertainment and genuinely frightening material. Among his credits sit the chest-bursting horrors of Aliens and the cackling, witchy menace of Hocus Pocus, which is not remotely the pedigree you would ever guess for the warm-hearted monster of a children's baseball movie where the scariest-looking thing on screen is supposed to turn out gentle in the end. Pull up almost any behind-the-scenes photograph of the beast rig, and the family resemblance to an outright horror creature is impossible to miss. All bared teeth, heavy bulk, and dead-eyed menace, Sitting far closer to a monster movie prop than to the goofy, slobbering, tail-wagging mascot the film eventually reveals it to be. That gap is the real joke hiding inside the hardware. The most flat-out frightening object on the entire production grew up, against all reasonable odds, to be the warmest and friendliest character in the finished film. The very same pair of hands that had built genuine screen nightmares had, this time, built a friend. Number 21. A Red Sox fan as a Yankees fanatic. Few pieces of casting ever cut harder against an actor's real-world loyalties than this particular one did. Denis Leary, a loud, proud, lifelong devotee of the Boston Ball Club, was hired on to play Bill, a stepfather who lives and dies by the rival New York team and guards a ball signed by Babe Ruth as though it were a sacred relic. For a true son of Boston, spending weeks worshiping the Bronx on camera amounted to its own small and private ordeal, a daily test of an allegiance he had carried his entire life. By his own cheerful account, Leary took the part somewhat against his own better judgment, joking afterward about the old showbiz commandment never to work with children or animals, both of which the Sandlot happened to have in considerable abundance. Whatever reservations he carried in with him, though, the experience clearly softened him. He spoke with real warmth about the young cast he found himself surrounded by, and about the simple, almost boyish thrill of getting to share a production with James Earl Jones, whose voice he had grown up hearing in the dark of a theater like everybody else. So a man who genuinely could not stand the Yankees in real life ended up spending an entire summer shoot pretending to live and breathe for them, and walked away from the whole experience a good deal fonder of it than he had ever once expected to be, children and animals and the hated rival uniform all included. Number 22. The narrator was the director. The warm, wistful, grown-up voice that narrates the entire story belongs to a man whose name appears nowhere in the credits for the job. That voice is David Mickey Evans himself, the film's own director, narrating his own childhood memories from behind a curtain of complete anonymity. In a certain way, it makes perfect sense. The very man who actually lived through that original summer, quietly speaking on behalf of the boy reliving it on screen, a grown man narrating the child he himself used to be. Then comes the twist that the vast majority of fans go their whole lives never once catching. The adult Smalls that audiences actually see at the very end of the picture, the grown man who steps into the frame to close the story out, is not Evans at all. He is played by another, entirely separate uncredited performer, the actor Arliss Howard, who lent his face to a character whose voice had come from somebody else completely. So the film's whole nostalgic heart was, without anyone in the audience ever being the wiser, quietly split clean in two. One man speaks for the grown-up Smalls, while a second, different man physically stands in as him, and both of them were carefully tucked away off the credits, hidden in the one place almost no curious viewer would ever think to go looking for either of them. Number 23. Two giants and a baby food trick. Up close, a full-grown English Mastiff is a sheer wall of muscle and loose jowls, easily the size of a small adult leaning its entire weight against you. The real flesh-and-blood beast that handled the film's close-up scenes was exactly that, an English Mastiff named Gunner, backed up by a second dog of the very same breed who took over for the more active, demanding stunt work. Between the two of them, the animals gave the lovable monster all of its warm, breathing, living presence in every single shot where a suit and a set of stilts simply would not do, all warmth and drool and lumbering good nature. The single tenderest dog moment in the whole movie, though, needed a small amount of bribery to actually pull off. For the scene in which the beast joyfully slobbers and licks all over Smalls's face, the crew quietly smeared baby food across Tom Guiry's cheeks, transforming the young actor into something the Mastiff was absolutely thrilled to get to work on. What plays on screen as the purest, sloppiest animal affection was, behind the scenes, mostly just a very hungry dog going enthusiastically and single-mindedly after its own lunch. Guiry, for his part, took the entire indignity in good humor, cheerfully resigned to spending the day slathered in what he later called baby goo, all for the sake of one of the very sweetest beats the film has, a boy and his monster, at long last, friends. Number 24. The real Squints sued the studio. Most movie characters do not arrive with a living, breathing counterpart from the actual world, standing by and ready to haul the production into a courtroom. This one most certainly did. A man named Michael Polidoros had grown up right alongside David Mickey Evans, and when he finally sat down to watch the finished film, he recognized far too much of himself staring back out of the bespectacled, slightly hapless kid the movie calls Squints Polidoros. The resemblance, Polidoros argued, ran well past anything that could fairly be waved off as coincidence. The character carried the unmistakable shape of his own old childhood nickname, wore his glasses, even shared the general look he had worn as a boy. And so he took 20th Century Fox to court over the whole thing, formally alleging both invasion of privacy and defamation. He went so far as to produce an actual photograph of himself from back in the 1960s, and a judge, looking it over, agreed that it bore a genuine likeness to the on-screen Squints, right down to the spectacles and the very shirt. For a stretch of time, one of the most beloved supporting characters in a gentle family film had somehow become the center of a real and bitter legal storm. This is the point where the law draws a hard and genuinely useful line. A film, the courts ultimately held, is protected fiction, free to draw on memory and on real people without ever being required to become a literal, point-for-point portrait of any single one of them. The case dragged on for years before it was finally settled, but in the end, the filmmakers won it outright. The suit dismissed on the bedrock principle that childhood nostalgia, once it has been shaped into a story, is precisely the kind of speech the law exists to protect. Number 25. Lasorda unlocked the big finale. At Dodger Stadium, where the film's flash-forward ending had always been meant to be shot, the production ran straight into a wall. For a stretch of time, the crew simply could not secure permission to film inside the ballpark at all, which left the movie's big, sweeping send-off stranded without the one stage it genuinely needed. The grown-up Smalls had to stand on a real major league field, and the major leagues were not exactly picking up the phone. The way out, in the end, came down to a single friendship. Cinematographer Anthony Richmond happened to be close with Tommy Lasorda, the legendary manager of the Dodgers, and a few quiet words from Lasorda shook loose a filming date that all the official channels in the world had not been able to produce. The movie's entire big league finale ultimately existed because of one personal connection rather than any studio's clout or budget. There is a second, smaller secret tucked away inside that very same closing sequence. The great majority of the Dodgers seen filling out the field in those final shots were not professional ball players at all, but ordinary crew members pulled into team uniforms, a homegrown roster quietly standing in for the real thing. It was exactly the sort of scrappy, make-it-work resourcefulness that would, over the following decades, come to define the whole strange and unlikely afterlife of the film, where almost nothing came easily and almost everything got solved anyway. Number 26. Sequels and a reboot that died. The Sandlot eventually went on to spawn two separate follow-ups, both of them sent straight to video rather than out into theaters. The Sandlot 2 turned up in 2005, and The Sandlot, Heading Home followed along in 2007, with James Earl Jones gamely returning as Mr. Myrtle to lend the pair at least a thin thread of continuity back to the original. They sold well enough on home shelves without ever truly catching fire. Neither one of them ever came anywhere close to the place the first film holds in people's hearts. David Mickey Evans, as it happens, had ambitions that stretched well beyond a couple of modest follow-ups. He had imagined an ongoing, almost generational series, one that would leap forward decade by decade and follow brand new Sandlot gangs through the shifting eras of American boyhood, a fresh Sandlot for every passing generation. Years later, after Disney swallowed up Fox in its great acquisition, that long-dormant dream briefly flickered back to life as a planned revival show, this one meant to reunite the surviving original cast as grown men. Then, just as quietly, it slipped away again, shelved and canceled before audiences ever got to see a single frame of it. The first film stubbornly remains the only one that ever truly stuck, which leaves one lingering question hanging over the whole enterprise. Whether a story this tightly bound to one specific, irretrievable summer was ever really meant to be continued at all. Number 27. An LA summer shot in 42 days. Everything about the picture quietly insists on lazy California, all that San Fernando Valley sprawl stretching out under a sun that never once seems to be in any kind of hurry. And yet none of it was actually filmed anywhere near there. The entire movie was shot up in Utah instead, around Salt Lake City and the towns of Midvale and Ogden, every last bit of it standing in for the Valley of Evans's own remembered boyhood. Stranger still, that whole sprawling, season-spanning, summer-long story was captured on camera in only about 6 weeks of work, with the crew sweating its way through genuinely punishing heat in order to bottle a feeling of slow, unhurried, endless time on a schedule that was anything but slow. The most relaxed-looking summer in the entire history of the movies was, in cold reality, shot flat out and against the clock, in a state most viewers would never once guess they were looking at. Number 28. A record breaker hides in the cast. There is a genuine, certified piece of baseball history standing quietly off in the corner of this film, and across 30 years, almost nobody watching has ever once clocked it. At one point, the narration casually name-drops the year 1962 as the season in which a player named Maury Wills would go on to shatter the all-time record for stolen bases in a single year. On its surface, it plays as nothing more than a small period detail, a little wink tossed out to the genuinely baseball literate in the audience. The real trick, though, lies in who is delivering the world around that very line. Maury Wills was no invention. He was a real and deeply beloved Dodgers legend, the man who in actual fact went out and swiped a then-record 104 bases over that single 1962 season, very nearly single-handedly rewriting what people had believed a base stealer was even capable of. The movie does something genuinely sly with him. Wills himself turns up on screen, quietly credited as the coach, a flesh-and-blood, Hall of Fame caliber talent tucked almost invisibly into a children's film about make-believe ballplayers. The very stolen base record that the narrator name-checks in passing belongs, in other words, to the man standing right there in the dugout in a coach's cap. It makes for a genuinely lovely piece of sleight of hand, real baseball history sewn so invisibly into the film's gentle fiction that the authentic article ends up standing shoulder to shoulder with the pretend. How many millions of viewers, across 3 full decades, have looked straight at a record-setting Dodgers great and seen nothing more than some movie extra in a ball cap? For a film that opened to such modest numbers, The Sandlot has gone on to enjoy an astonishing second life. It became a permanent fixture of American summer, the kind of movie people quote without even thinking, rewatch every few years, and eventually sit their own kids down in front of. Whatever magic it managed to find, it has not let go of it in 3 full decades. Maybe that is because it captured a version of boyhood that never quite existed for anyone, that endless, unsupervised golden stretch of long days and bigger dreams. It made everyone feel they had lived it anyway. That is the trick at its very center, the same one I opened on. It sells you a summer you can never get back and somehow convinces you that you genuinely remember it. If you found yourself remembering your own while watching, I'd be glad if you hit like and subscribed, because there are plenty more movie secrets where these came from. And before you go, tell me down in the comments which Sandlot secret caught you most off guard, or the one line from it that you still find yourself quoting out of nowhere.